Hello and welcome to Lecture 2 in Imagining Health in Social and Cultural Context 100. This lecture is called Anthropology and Health, and here I complete the toolkit, the 10 points, conceptual ideas really that we are using throughout this unit. The focus here is on culture and the social construction of meaning. Although we deal with culture separately in this lecture, it informs every aspect of the toolkit discussed in the first lecture, Sociology and Health. You cannot easily separate culture from other aspects of the social world. However, we will be looking in depth at what role culture plays in healthcare and in the social determinants of health. So today this lecture covers the last 2 points of the Imagining Health Toolkit, the discipline of anthropology, culture and the social construction of meaning, and cultural safety in healthcare. So yes, here's your toolkit, and I'm reminding you that the first learning outcome for this unit says demonstrate an understanding of health and illness using anthropological and sociological frameworks. We draw in particular from anthropology today. So culture is unique to human beings. We do see culture in other animals, but not to the extent that we see it in human beings. Humans have one of the longest enculturation periods. In fact, people are now staying at home until their 30s, 35 before they leave. And this is unique to human beings. What is also unique is the extent to which culture informs all aspects of our social life. Culture interacts with biology and with the environment. You cannot easily separate out culture and biology. This has been referred to as the nurture-nature debate. Is our behavior more because of nurturing or how we were brought up, or nature, our biological programming, if you like? Culture is not biologically determined, so there's an interaction there between culture and biology. What do we mean by meaning is constructed? Constructing, of course, means to build. We create meaning. And there is the idea here that there is no objective way to understand the world. The way we see the world is always filtered through our socialization, our cultural lenses. We create meaning, therefore, as we move through life. What is anthropology then? This is what we are drawing on for this lecture. Well, the term comes from the Greek meaning the study of humans, or human beings. Hellman has described it as the holistic study of humankind, its origins, development, social and political organizations, religions, languages, art, and artifacts. It is fascinating for me as an anthropologist because it covers the broad spectrum of human existence. Anthropology, because it is so broad, has been divided in numerous subfields, and one of these is medical anthropology. Others you might be familiar with include archaeology, linguistic anthropology, primatology, the study of primates, but here we are drawing on medical anthropology. Anthropology is distinct from other disciplines partly because of its methodology. What anthropologists look for is both the etic and the emic view. So the emic view is the insider's view. How do people in a particular situation make sense of what they do, what they believe, how they go about life? An etic view is the outsider's, or perhaps the academic view, looking in and seeing the patterns within a social group and people's behavior. And by shifting back and forth between the etic and emic view gives us a very rich view of social life and what is happening. One technique that anthropologists use is participant observation, and it is just what it sounds like. The anthropologist participates in the daily lives of a group of people and therefore experiences what that phenomenon is like. At the same time, the anthropologist is observing what is happening through detailed field notes. And so that, again, that encapsulates that etic, emic, that insider's, outsider's view. And you get some very rich information by conducting participant observation. Ethnography, ethno meaning a group of people, graphy to write, is the product of an anthropologist. Ethnographies are usually very rich, detailed descriptions of the social world based on long-term fieldwork and participant observation. There are some great ethnographies you might want to read. For example, Doreen Kondo's ethnography on the fashion industry in New York. Or Nancy Sheffer-Hughes's ethnography on living in the shanty towns in Brazil. What distinguishes anthropological work from other types of social science is the depth and detail brought to their work and the rigorous attention to context. And you will see this in this unit, in fact, in the very title for this unit, Imagining Health in Social and Cultural Context. You can only understand what is happening if you look at it in its environment and look at the number of factors that are impacting on that issue. Anthropologists also conduct longitudinal studies. They want to see over a great period of time what is happening. And for this reason, anthropologists develop often quite rich relationships with people over 20, 30 years of research. It is holistic. I've already mentioned the fact that anthropology covers the whole of life, and it is multidisciplinary. You can imagine that any particular aspect of the social world you study will overlap with other disciplines, perhaps law, or political science, or economics, or in the case of the fashion industry, with fashion or material science. So that gives you an overview of anthropology. Medical anthropology is about how people in different cultures and social groups explain the causes of ill health, the types of treatments they believe in, and to whom they turn if they get ill. And that is why we use it in this unit. Medical anthropology draws insights from both the social and natural sciences and is sometimes described as being a biocultural discipline. A lot of the evidence that we use comes from clinical trials or observations in clinical settings, and that is the biocultural information. Clinical anthropologists now work in hospitals and on health projects, raising awareness of the importance of cultural factors in health and illness. So what are medical anthropologists interested in? Well, on the other side of your screen here is a list of some of the research interests for medical anthropologists. Variations in health beliefs and practices in multicultural populations. The significance of health beliefs and practices surrounding pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period. And this is interesting because it varies greatly from place to place. Cultural barriers to healthcare, the health of indigenous populations, transcultural psychiatry, because many of our notions in psychiatry were developed within one particular cultural context and are not easily transferred to other situations. And in international settings, medical anthropologists are involved with aid agencies, and particularly on the issue of HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment. Culture. Now, of course, we define key terms before we go on to discuss them, look at the evidence, and then relate to professional practice. That is the social science methodology and one of your 10 toolkit items for this unit. Now, culture is a fascinating concept, I feel, because at the same time it refers to everything, and yet it is not the most relevant factor in every situation. It's a very elusive yet vital concept. So here are some definitions of culture. A set of guidelines that individuals inherit, which help us view the world, experience it emotionally, and influence our behavior in relation to supernatural forces or gods and to the natural environment. Another definition is an inherited lens through which the individual perceives and understands the world. Now this is a good one. I think that is perhaps the most accurate definition. An inherited lens. We get a set of glasses from our grandparents, our community, our teachers, our extended family, and we see the world through those lenses. We may not see what is not covered by the lenses as clearly. Yes, our culture causes us to look at some things and disregard others. What is interesting when you gain cross-cultural awareness is that you realize that this is only one set of glasses you can wear. And down the road at Specsavers, there are 200 other pairs that would give you a slightly different view on the world. Culture has been described as learned, accumulated experience. Learned, it is taught to us by people, which is also sometimes called the socialization process. And accumulated, it builds over time. When you think about a newborn who is immediately taught cultural information from the moment they are born, well, actually before, through to our entire lives, we are always gaining experience and knowledge and expertise in our own cultural area and in wider context. A great definition is from Taylor from 1871. Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Now I've added sick there in square brackets, and this is because I find man to be a gender non-inclusive term. I would prefer humans, and so I'm putting that there to say that I find that part of the quote problematic. You might want to do that in your essay if you encounter something similar. Keating and Strathern have another definition for culture. It is systems of shared ideas, systems of concepts and rules and meanings that underlie and are expressed in the ways that human beings live. All of these are available in the article by Hellman, which you can access through eReserve. Now, the reading for this week, pardon me, has another definition, also very useful. Culture is a system of shared ideas, attitudes, and practices that defines the social system of its members. Now, what's interesting is I find that many Australian students say, well, I don't have culture. Other people have culture. They have their ethnic dress or their special food or their foreign language, and you can see that they have culture, but I don't actually have culture. And this is interesting because if that person traveled to a different part of Australia or traveled overseas, they would immediately see that yes, they do indeed have culture, and it is a very rich one. But we can be blind to our own culture because it is so familiar. It's like a comfortable pair of shoes, and we're not really aware to the extent to which it informs our lives. There's a quote here from the reading for this week. It says, most people never think about the culture they are part of and how it affects their ideas and understanding. We begin to absorb the principles of our culture from birth, or I argue actually before, and eventually they become the basis for our worldview. We do not need to think about our own culture, but we use it as the basis for making decisions about everything we experience. Again, like the glasses, we take in information, we put out information, our behavior is all strongly informed by our cultural view. Now, culture can be divided into the material and the ideational, or the realm of ideas. Material aspects, which are things which are touchable and observable. Goods such as art, furniture, sticks. When it comes to medicine, this would be stethoscopes and other equipment and uniforms and other things that we can touch. Non-material aspects refers to the realm of ideas and include our shared belief systems and values. And this is key to this unit because it is in the non-material that we have our explanations of health, wellness, and illness. So our cultural background influences how we define health and illness, how we respond to symptoms, where we locate causation, and from whom we seek health care. To give you one quick example, having hallucinations. For people from a Western biomedical background, this is thought to be very wrong if you are seeing things or hearing voices. It is an illness that requires medication and perhaps psychiatric treatment. For other peoples in the world, this is a gift from the gods. It is a spiritual ability that you've been given, and those visions and voices are a rich source of spiritual data that should be incorporated into life. Two very, very different views to on what seems to be the same phenomenon. Now, perhaps we've defined what culture is. It is useful now to talk a little bit about what culture is not, because culture is often blamed for many things in life because of the way the term is used. So first of all, culture is not homogeneous. Homo means the same, and the idea here is that not every single person within a cultural group will have the same view of things. It is, in other words, internally diverse. Culture is not unchanging. In fact, culture is changing all the time, incorporating new aspects. All you need to do is to have grandparents and grandchildren or members of those generations speak to each other to see how much culture has changed within a short period of time. Culture is not separable from language. Language and culture are incredibly entwined. In fact, it is through language that we understand the world and make sense of it. I'll give you one example, and that is the word now. Now, for me, now means right now, as in this moment when I'm giving this lecture at my desk. In Mexico, however, many people use the word ahora, and ahora can mean, yes, it means now, but ahora could mean today, this week, this month. in the last couple of months, generally around this period of time. And so when someone says the word now, you need to clarify or understand in the context of the sentence what they are thinking about. And that reveals something very different about time. My orientation to time is very linear and segmented. The word ahora captures a more fluid and more fluid, broad concept of time. And that is just one small example of how language influences culture. Now, what is interesting here, we'll look at the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Differences in languages affect the way speakers think. And that is the example I just gave you now. So, for example, the word now for me it is part of my way of viewing time as linear and segmented. For someone else, it affects the way they think of now as part of the past and part of the future, and you can't really separate the three. Therefore, language affects how we take in information, how we process that information, how we understand ourselves and the world, how we express ourselves. It shapes our attitudes and beliefs. In health, you can see our understandings of health and wellness captured in language, communicated in language, in the vocabulary, in the way we speak. So culture and language are extremely interrelated, but not necessarily the same thing. Language shapes culture, culture shapes language. Now here's another example from the reading for this week. In Indonesia, the word sakit means both sick and in pain. For me, I have 50 words to describe pain: stabbing pain, aching pain, throbbing pain, jabbing pain. You get the idea, it could go on. In a study in former Yugoslavia, it was found that people had only one word for pain, which was bol. And so this shows linguistically there's very different ways to both understand, communicate, and experience pain, which is a shared human phenomenon. In many cases, nonverbal language is even more important than verbal language in communicating health or wellness and illness. Language is a key to understanding symptoms, practitioners, and treatment. Language is one of the key factors in health to secure good health care. It is the cause of many problems in healthcare, which results in greater morbidity or mortality. So some questions for reflective thinking, which means for you to think about your own attitudes towards culture and health. Do you have any home treatments that you use for illness and injuries, things that your parents or caregivers taught you? What are some of the ideas that many Australians have about health? For example, a long time people said if you sat on cold concrete, you'd get piles or hemorrhoids. Or if you are in a breeze too much, you'll get a cold. These are some ideas that people have about health. Do you hold any? What kind of illness behavior is expected where you come from? How do you communicate to people that you don't feel well? What are some characteristics of Australian culture? You might want to pause this lecture and have a think about some of those questions. Now, culture is often thought to be the same as race and ethnicity, and sociologists and anthropologists separate those terms. And in fact, we find the concept of race very problematic, and for that reason you see it in parentheses. I encourage you to also do this in your writing. Now, race was a concept. It is socially constructed, culturally created. So again, this lecture is looking at culture and the social construction of meaning. We created this concept of race, and it has been very strong, particularly in Western influenced countries for many years. So the concept developed at the start of the 15th century. Before that, we don't see a clear concept similar to race. It appeared at the time of the growth of rational science, biomedical science as we would call it today, and it provided a scientific justification for slavery or the domination of other peoples. And remember, the 15th century was a time when Europeans were spreading out around the world and competing for the conquering of territories. It is a term without scientific basis that uses skin color and facial features to describe what are alleged to be biologically distinct groups of humans. The Human Genome Project has, more than anything else perhaps, discredited the idea of race. In fact, it's been found that there's more variation within so-called racial groups than there are between them when we look at the genotype. So therefore, race is a social construct used to categorize people, to put them into categories and groups. And then what usually happens is those groups are ordered, who are superior, who are inferior. It used to be talked about the civilized, the barbarians, and the savages. And this thinking is still very strong today. Now, racialism is the idea of biologically distinct races, which was then coupled with the notion that you could rank humans, yes, in this hierarchy from the lowest to the highest. And at the time, this was added to Charles Darwin's ideas about evolution. Evolution hit the scientific community very strongly. It was a radical idea, and it changed the way a lot of people thought about human beings. Now, many people in the world believe that evolution is not a convincing way to understand history. What happened in this time is that you took the scientific awareness of the evolution of the species and added that to the social construct of race to say that some racial groups were more evolved than other groups. And that with survival of the fittest, some groups were meant to survive and some groups were meant to die out. And this justified a whole range of practices. For example, in Australia, it was thought that Aboriginal people were savages, were primitives, and that they would not survive. They were going to die out, even though they had thrived in Australia for 50,000 years. But this thinking provided the justification for a number of violent acts. In fact, it's now described as an attempt at genocide, to get rid of, to kill, or to wait until they die for Aboriginal people so that the colonizers could take over the land and rule the country. So race has been a very powerful concept, and it has justified a number of very harmful practices directed against other human beings. What is ethnicity then? This term is often used in place of race. Ethnicity, rather than emphasizing the phenotype, hair color, skin color, nose size, body shape, characteristics like that, ethnicity instead emphasizes the social, the cultural. So it refers to a shared background. People who feel they belong together and have something in common, have a history, and have some culture. They self-identify as being part of that group. And they are recognized by other members of that group as being part of that group. This is ethnicity. Now, here are two key terms that flow on from the notion of race and from ethnicity. Ethnocentrism, centrum meaning focused, ethnic, of course, so I'm focused on my own ethnic group. Ethnocentrism means to view others from one's own cultural perspective with an implied sense of cultural superiority based on an ability to understand or accept the practices and beliefs of other cultures. Sorry, that should be an inability. I can't understand you. My way is the best way, therefore your way is wrong. It's also been described as the position of viewing one's own culture as superior to others and judging other cultural practices and beliefs as inferior to one's own. Now, this is different from racism. Racism is the discrimination against groups in our society on the basis of perceptions of difference in culture or biology. Usually, you're reading culture off biology. Because of people's biology, they have that type of culture, and therefore they are not as good as me. Racism is a fundamental social determinant of health, where interpersonal and institutional racist attitudes and behaviors are often embedded in social, structural, political contexts. So racism is not just an attitude that some people have. It becomes institutionalized, and you will see it in the legal system, in the political system, in the healthcare system, and that is why it is a strong social determinant of health. So we've discussed the fact that culture is not homogeneous. Culture changes over time. Culture is interlinked with, but also separate from language. Culture is not race or ethnicity, although it plays a key role in the judgments about race and in ethnic identity. Culture is also not nationality or even the only or most important factor in ill health. And I've got a case study here to talk about numbers 5 and 6. So this is a case study from Kleinman and Benson, Anthropology in the Clinic, the Problem of Cultural Competency and How to Fix It. Here's the case study. A medical anthropologist is asked by a pediatrician in California to consult in the case of a Mexican man who was HIV positive. The man's wife had died of AIDS 1 year ago. He has a 4-year-old son who was also HIV positive, but he has not been bringing the child. The explanation given by the clinicians assumed that the problem turned on radically different cultural understanding. What the anthropologist found, though, was to the contrary. This man had a near complete understanding of HIV/AIDS and its treatment, largely through the support of a local nonprofit organization aimed at supporting Mexican-American patients with HIV. However, he was a very low-paid bus driver, often working late night shifts, and he had no time to take his son to the clinic to receive care for him as regularly as his doctors requested. His failure to attend was not because of cultural differences, but rather his practical socio-economic position. Talking with him and taking into account his local world were more useful than positing radically different Mexican health beliefs. So there are several things I want to raise here. One, of course, it shows the role that an anthropologist can play in healthcare, although the anthropologist would not have been needed if the healthcare professional had been able to talk to this man and find out what was happening. In this case, nationality or cultural identity were not the key factors. It was money and time and his job. Those were the reasons he didn't bring his son into care. So you can focus on culture when it is not the most relevant or even the relevant factor. Now this takes place in California. It could be this man is a third-generation Mexican American. He could be an indigenous person from Mexico. He could be a Mexican whose family came from a different Latin American country, because Mexico contains many migrants from South America. And Mexican culture is known in the United States because of that large border and because of the long history between the two countries. Who knows what judgments the clinician was making? What aspect of Mexican culture was informing the thinking? So when I say that culture is not only in the patients, the culture was also in the healthcare provider. Who knows what aspect of culture they were drawing upon? However, culture does inform healthcare behaviors, and it can be a very important factor in health and wellness for patients. Here is an example taken from the Hmong group in Australia. The Hmong are a tribal people from Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, who originated in the mountain region of China. Many Hmong people came to Australia as refugees following the war in that part of the world. Now, Hmong people believe in shamans. These are spiritual leaders who intercede between the people and the spirit world, ancestor worship, animation, and it is a very strongly community-focused culture. So it is less individualistic, for example, than Anglo-Celtic culture. The Hmong believe that people have 3 souls. One looks after the body during life and upon death. One travels to the other worlds to await an opportunity for rebirth, because reincarnation is an important spiritual idea. And a 3rd soul lives with the person's ancestors in the other world. During life, when you are healthy, all 3 souls reside in the body. Now, this is a case study from a hospital in Melbourne. It was published in the Medical Journal of Australia in 1994. Mai, a 34-year-old woman with 6 children, is pregnant with her 7th child, who's in a transverse lie. It is recommended that she gets her cesarean section. Her husband is not allowed to stay in the operating theatre. She goes in, she has the cesarean section. Following this, mother and baby are well. However, Following the birth, Mai actually doesn't continue to feel well. In fact, she feels quite badly for several months. Finally, what she has found, what she believes, is that while she was put under the anesthetic and then she was moved from the operating theater into the recovery room, one of her souls detached itself from her body and got lost. So she is living with only 2 souls rather than 3, and her 3rd soul is out wandering the world trying to find her. What the hospital allowed to happen was that the shaman came into the operating theater with a live chicken and incense and conducted a soul calling ceremony to bring my soul back. He then moved into the recovery room, so he traced the journey that her body took and reunited her 3 souls, and Mai afterwards experienced very good health. Now, you may not believe that you have 3 souls. You may not believe that when you go under a general anesthetic that you risk losing one of your souls. And you may not know of a hospital that would allow live incense and live chicken and incense to be present in an operating theater. In this case, however, some questions come up. Why couldn't Mai's husband go in with her while she was having the cesarean section? He could have helped tether the soul to his wife's body. Or why couldn't the Caesar have been planned beforehand so that Mai could visit the shaman who could have helped protect her and guard her souls, if you like, during that process? Why wasn't she given an epidural so that she could be awake during the process and therefore she wouldn't lose a soul? It raises a lot of questions about culturally safe healthcare in the Australian context. And finally, is culture only in patients? No, you wear your own glasses, you have your own view of the world, and you bring that to every clinical or social encounter you have. Also, culture strongly informs the healthcare system. Here's a chart that we are going to be referring to throughout the unit, comparing the biomedical and social model of health. It comes from page 17 in the first reading by Germov. It's in your textbook. And what you will find throughout this unit is that the biomedical model, the model that informs our hospitals, the medical system, the way we treat people, the way we organize it, the way we train you at university, is culturally informed. And it can be uncomfortable for some students to realize that because the biomedical model seems natural, normal. It's a given. That's the way you do it. It's the proper, modern, safe, appropriate way of providing health, isn't it? Well, that's the question that's what I want to challenge in this unit. Biomedicine has some great benefits to us. It is also culturally informed. The social model of health also is culturally informed, and we will explore this as we go through the unit. One thing to note in the biomedical system is that the distribution of power and knowledge. In some health systems, knowledge is shared from people, and there is a much more equal or level playing field, if you like, in terms of information and knowledge. In the biomedical system, there is a clear hierarchy. Some people have more knowledge and more power. People have less knowledge and less power. And that's represented there by that triangle on your screen. At the bottom, unfortunately, are patients. For me, when I go in, I'm an anthropologist, remember, not a nurse or psychologist or social worker or physiotherapist. When I go into hospital, a lot of the equipment seems quite foreign. It's beeping, it's roaring, it's moved from here to there, the smells are different, the terms people are using are different. I don't understand a third of what is going on. And yet I was raised with the biomedical system, and it is my preferred or first method of healing and treatment. This is even more so for other patients who come from different backgrounds. And you can see in this hierarchy, at the very top are the specialists to whom we give great respect and a lot of money comparatively. The higher up the triangle you go, the more knowledge you have, and therefore, as Foucault long pointed out, the more power you have. And so you've got an inverse triangle there to represent power, authority, status, conditions of employment, specialist knowledge, jargon, your comfort with the physical environment, your awareness of the technology and equipment, the sounds, the clothing, the form of communication, etc. And so for people who are not familiar with biomedicine, you can see that it is a very intimidating and confusing and threatening environment for some because they don't have access to these things listed in the yellow triangle. Now, culture informs health in another way, and that is how we treat one another. This is before necessarily we get into the clinical setting. I've tried to unpick the concept of culture by saying it's not homogeneous. It changes over time. You know, the various things that I've discussed in this lecture so far. The problem is that many people do see culture as rigid, as fixed, as unchanging, as having clear borders. This is in the culture and that's outside of the culture. It's always been this way, it always will be this way. And that culture programs people to act in certain ways. This is a very common view of culture. The danger of this is the cycle of prejudice. So for example, if I believe that all people in this particular cultural group have these views and do things those ways, and I also believe it's caused by their biology as well as by their culture, I may stereotype. All people are like that. Yes? They're all the same and they're all like that and they always do this. These are generalizations resulting in stereotypes. Now, so a view of culture that is too rigid leads to stereotyping. Since they're all the same and we don't look at context and we're making big assumptions, the danger of this is you move into prejudice. Attitudes and beliefs which grow out of stereotypes which are negative. Those people always do that. You know, oh, they don't know anything. They're dirty people. Yes? Prejudice against particular people. Prejudice leads to discrimination, acting out those negative beliefs. So you're speaking against people, excluding them, separating them, segregating them, violence against them, or even to the extent of extermination in the form of genocide or ethnic cleansing. And then it starts all over again. This is one thing that we are trying to break down in this unit, and the cause of it is our view of culture. If you take a different view of culture, see it as fluid, see it as changing, see it as complex, see it as situational. It changes. It is performative. I emphasize different parts of my culture depending upon who I'm speaking with. It's not that I'm being fake, it's that different people draw out, or different circumstances draw out different aspects of myself. I'm a complex person. Everyone is. If we see culture as being more this way, more complex, it is less easy to go into stereotypes. We recognize that any cultural group is made up of individuals and of subgroups. Yes, that it is complex. It is less easy for us to go on this loop, the cycle of prejudice. And this brings us to cultural safety. This is one part of the Imagination Health Toolkit. It is one of the learning outcomes for this unit, and it is one of the most important concepts that you will cover at Curtin University. Being culturally safe is now a requirement of health professionals. So let's find out what it's about. The concept was originally developed in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and there's a number of articles by Ramsden that you'll find in the reference list at the end of this lecture that I recommend you have a look. It developed in the 1980s, and the concept originally, it acknowledged the impact of colonization on the health outcomes for Maori. Now, like Australia, the healthcare system in New Zealand represents the values of the dominant group. It's biomedical. It reflects the culture of the Anglo-Celtic, or English if you like, colonizers of the country. It does not reflect necessarily the values of most Maori, the indigenous population of New Zealand. Therefore, when Maori were coming in for health services, they were not comfortable. Their health outcomes were not good, or maybe they even avoided the healthcare system because it was not culturally safe for them. There was also recognition that Aotearoa, New Zealand, was becoming a culturally diverse nation through immigration. The healthcare system may not have been culturally safe for those groups either. And inherent in the notion of cultural safety is power. And if we go back to this slide, oh, it's going to be too complicated. The slide of the inverse triangle, yes, where we're talking about the level of power in the healthcare system, it was recognized that Maori and ethnically diverse patients did not have a lot of power when they went into hospital, and this was causing adverse health outcomes. So Williams has described cultural safety as shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge and experience of learning, living, and working together and truly listening. What's interesting about this is it's talking about an exchange, a two-way flow. Yes, not a top-down flow from health providers with all the knowledge to the patients who don't know much, but an exchange of values, of understanding, a dialogue, if you like. This happens anyway in a healthcare context because we need to find out what's happening for patients or clients, but this is taking that further, taking it to another level. It is very relevant when it comes to Indigenous health. Indigenous peoples have distinct and diverse languages and cultures, and they may be less comfortable with the culture of biomedicine. Now, not all, but some. There is a greater burden of disease in every country that has an Indigenous population. Indigenous people are more frequently hospitalized. They're hospitalized for longer periods of time. They suffer from higher mortality and morbidity, and at a younger age than the mainstream population. They have a lower life expectancy and a lower health-adjusted life expectancy, which means they get sick and have a lower quality of life earlier than other peoples. And the root of some of this is the lack of cultural safety in society and in the healthcare system. Cultural safety isn't something that you just get overnight. I'm going to be culturally safe. If I read a little bit, kaboom, there I am. I'm culturally safe. Like culture, it is a learned, accumulated experience, skill, if you like. It involves an attitude shift, and it is a lifelong process. It is therefore thought that there's kind of a continuum of growth on this. You start off with cultural awareness. You realize that there's differences between your own cultural background and the culture of other people. And you may get some general training, recognition about the differences and commonalities between different groups. Cultural sensitivity is the next stage. You begin to think, how might my awareness of these differences influence my behavior? How can I accommodate cultural needs that are different to my own? So this is more engaged and active. You're thinking, one is just an awareness, which seems in some ways quite visual or intellectual. Cultural sensitivity to me seems more behavioral as well as heart and mind. You're then thinking, okay, how am I acting in the world in relation to people from different backgrounds to my own? From that, we move into cultural safety, a point where you and whoever you deal with feel culturally safe in any particular interaction. How do we know when we are culturally competent practitioners? Now, I may just take a moment here to say that there's some confusion about terminology. This notion has gone from Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Australia, to England, to United States, to Canada, and as the term moves, it changes. Some places emphasize cultural competence, other people emphasize cultural safety. Some people use the terms interchangeably, so you just need to be aware of that terminology. So how do we know when we are culturally competent practitioners? Well, it's when the people that we interact with, when they feel culturally safe. Some principles for cultural safety. This was developed by the Nursing Council of New Zealand in 2005. Health professionals should reflect on their practice. In this unit, we do engage in self-reflection, and in fact, you hopefully did during this lecture, thinking about your attitudes, thinking about your behaviors, being aware of how you operate in the world. Health professionals should seek to minimize power differentials between yourself and your patient. They should engage in a discourse, talk to people, listen to people, try to understand their worldview. Undertake a process of decolonization, which at the very first instance, meaning understand the impact that colonization has had on the society, on the healthcare system, on various social determinants. And this unit provides that because we look at societies in context. We look at a broad range of social factors impacting any particular health issue. Ensure that you do not demean or disempower others through your actions. Cultural competency, this is in the reading for this work. Cultural competency for the healthcare professional means the ability to work effectively with people from different cultures and who speak different languages. A culturally competent healthcare system is one that acknowledges the importance of cultural practices and the relationship between cultures in achieving health outcomes. Well, it raises a lot of questions. What, how, and by whom should comfort and support be provided when someone is sick? When should cultural background be taken into account, and when is it not a vital factor? It's no easy thing to work with culture in health, and this is why culture is so fascinating to me. It is everywhere, and yet it may not be the important factor. It's everywhere, but it can be invisible, an elusive but vital concept. One of the main things you can do to become a culturally safe practitioner, to be an effective healthcare provider, is to be aware of what you bring to any particular healthcare situation. You are culturally informed. The way you view things, the way you speak, the way you move your body, the way you use language, the type of language you use, everything is informed by your background. So that just tells you you've got religious influences, your own ethnic background, your personal history, the government role that you grew up under, the discipline. Nursing, for example, teaches you a set of behaviors that are different from physiotherapy or from social work. And that also changes how you view the healthcare system. Your family background, whether you are a man or a woman, your social class, etc. All of this impacts how you act, how you think, how you feel, how you express yourself. So this brings us to the end of the first two lectures, which provides you with a toolkit for imagining health. Be sure that you understand these 10 concepts that I've talked about over the last two lectures, and I encourage you to apply them to the topics that we look at each week in this unit. Thank you for listening.